exercise 12, which was on fungi, molds, and yeasts, you're going to evaluate the consequences by reading an article of genetically modified wine. Now that you know something about microbial genetics, it's time for you to start thinking about the consequences when foods are genetically modified. You're going to do this by preparing something called an implications wheel. There's an article that you can find on Blackboard entitled, "Will Grape Growers and Consumers Accept Genetically Modified Wines?" This was written by two authors, and I've compiled the important information together in this article. Take two highlighters while you're reading the article, and as you read, highlight the consequences that are identified by the author of genetically modifying the grape in one color, and the consequences of genetically modifying the microorganisms involved in winemaking in another color. Keep the consequences separate, although do be aware that some consequences may be linked to both. Using two highlighter colors will help you to keep the consequences from modifying the grape separate from the consequences of modifying the yeast. As you read this article, also think about other possible consequences, both positive and negative, about genetic modification of foods. You'll then be creating an implications wheel. Here's an example of an implications wheel. It begins with an event. For example, in this one, the event is increased choice of renewable energy sources. For you, you're going to have two: modification of the yeast and modification of the grape. So this is going to be an event. From that event, there are consequences. Things are going to happen when there's an increased choice of renewable energy sources, just as things will happen when there is genetic modification of the grape or genetic modification of the yeast. From that event, there are what are called first-order consequences, things that will happen immediately as a result, or could possibly happen immediately as a result of this event. For example, oil prices could go down. There could be destabilization of power in the energy market. Oil prices go down would be positive for the consumer. Destabilization of power in the energy market could be a positive event for a consumer, but could be a negative event for the energy market. So you can look at these consequences in several different ways. The author has identified a number of these first-order consequences, and you may think of other first-order consequences when you think about genetic modification of the grape or genetic modification of the yeast. This is a brainstorming tool, and it's very often used in strategic planning. It was developed by Joel Barker to be used in the business sector, but it's actually very useful when making any type of a decision. Now you can see from the first-order implications or consequences, there are second-order consequences. For example, when oil prices go down, some poor countries become oil dependent. When there's destabilization of power in the energy market, you have new winners and you have new losers. Some of the old players may not survive. From the second-order consequences, you can see third-order consequences. The third-order consequences are indicated here in the pinkish-red color, and you can see there are three lines attaching the third order to the second-order consequences. When there are new winners and losers, war and poverty in countries that don't develop new energy sources can ensue. So it's a brainstorming tool to help you to think about, whereas something might look good from first glance, there may be consequences down the road that you didn't originally think of. So you're going to create an implications wheel. Yours is going to look more like a bow tie because you're going to have two events that you are looking at after you read the article. Okay. So it's going to begin with the genetic modification of wine. That's that blue circle in the middle. To the left of it, you want to put genetic modification of yeast, and to the right of it, the genetic modification of the grape. As you read the article, you are going to put the first-order consequences, as you read them in the article, around either the grape or the yeast. For example, I'm reading in the article that expressing a specific gene from Chardonnay grapes in a Thompson seedless variety dramatically improves its resistance to fungal diseases like powdery mildew or sour bunch rot. This is definitely a consequence of genetic modification. It's a good one. It's improved resistance to fungal diseases. I might have highlighted that in red. As I'm reading through the article, I'm reading about GMO, or genetically modified organism, that's what that stands for, GMO yeast with hyper-competitive reproductive and survival abilities could, in theory, make native or non-commercial yeast strains an endangered species. So I would put that as a first-order consequence, increased yeast reproductive and survival abilities. Now when I think about that, what happens? Well, the article has already pointed that out, that non-native yeasts actually could become endangered species. So that would be a second-order consequence. There are going to be quite a few of these consequences for you to put onto this implications wheel, so it can get a little bit unruly. Here are a couple of suggestions to deal with this. You may do this on the computer, but unless you're really good with PowerPoint or creating these types of circles, you might run into problems. You're not required to do this on the computer. A good idea would be to tape 4 sheets of paper together to create enough space, or even use poster board. Again, you're not required to go out and buy poster board, but if you think this is going to be easier for you to create this larger sheet, then you certainly may do so. You want to use a template. A shot glass is really good for your circle. You also can create these circles on the computer, type in them, and then cut them out. Students have done that in the past, and that's worked well. You may use different colors of ink for the different orders and the connecting lines. That's not required, but you should put a single line for first order consequences, 2 lines for second, and 3 lines for third order. Clearly, you can come up with fourth order consequences as well. That could get quite unruly. Your final product is going to look like a bow tie because you're examining 2 scenarios. You could take 4 sheets of paper, for example, tape them together to make your genetic modification of the vine, and then take 4 sheets of paper, tape them together, do genetic modification of the yeast, and then tape them all together to turn them in. Part of this assignment focuses on reading comprehension. The author identifies consequences, and you must find those consequences that the author identifies. But the other part of this assignment encompasses creative thinking, finding other, additional, first, second, or third order complications. For example, if the public rejects genetically modified wine, what are some of the consequences? Well, obviously sales are going to decrease. But if the wine tastes better, then sales may increase. If sales increase, that would increase employment. If sales decrease, it decreases employment. So the number of unemployed workers in the workforce are going to go down. There will be consequences from that. So as you read the article, identify what the authors think are the consequences, and also come up with some of your own. Good luck with this assignment. Have some fun with it, and let me know if you have any questions.